Steele, and I am so you today. This is my second broadcast. I can hardly believe it. Now, today, of course, we're going to be talking about how to navigate the incredible times that we live. Of course, the last few weeks, both internationally and nationally, there have been some troubled times. And you and I are unfortunately caught in the middle of these incredible events that are happening around the world. I talked about yesterday about the fact that here we have two superpowers basically rattling their sabers. You had China a couple days ago saying if, of course, the Americans want to go to war, whether it's a tariff war or a trade war or a military war, we, of course, are ready to go. And they met yesterday at what they would call the Congress, the big gathering together. And there was all this talk from China that, they're not going to allow United States to be able to put tariffs on them without them retaliating. And they did retaliate. And then, of course, yesterday you had the Secretary of Defense basically saying, well, if they want to go to war, we're going to go to war. So we're right there right now. Now, we're not sure exactly what is going to happen because the simple fact is we're wondering if it's all saber rattling or is it something even more sinister than that. Now, that just reminds us about the fact that it is dangerous times. And so the question is, how does one respond when it's so dangerous times? Well, the first thing you need to do is make sure that you are not panicking. You see, that's part of the problem that's going on right now on Wall Street and Bay Street. People are panicking because there is so much uncertainty. You have United States, of course, placing tariffs on everybody around China, Canada. They held off, of course, to when it came to Mexico. And then yesterday they said, well, anything that is not under the U.S. trade agreement, the former NAFTA, then anything that is not covered under that is now going to face tariffs. And they're also talking about continuing putting on tariffs on Canadian and also as well Mexican steel and aluminum products. So there's still this constant uncertainty. So what do you do when all of these things happen? Well, the first thing, of course, is don't panic. And I want to tell you a little story that kind of emphasizes that particular situation. There was a fellow whose name was Joseph. And Joseph he was a prisoner at the time when Pharaoh had a very significant dream. Now, of course, the ancient world, they believed that dreams were very prophetic. They were predicting the future. And in this case, it was definitely doing that. See, Pharaoh had two dreams. The first dream was the fact that he saw some wheat that was full and then some wheat that had been parched. Then he saw skinny cows and fat cows. Now, what that meant was nobody could understand what it was. So finally, there was a fellow who was named the chief cupbearer, remembered Joseph had interpreted his dream in the prison. So what happened was Joseph was brought forward. And Joseph said very specifically, he says, listen, he says, I can't tell you the dream, but the God that I serve knows how to interpret dreams. And then he interpreted the fact that there was going to be 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine. And then he proposed the idea that during the 7 years of famine, or 7 years of plenty, I should say, they would stockpile all the wheat and all the excess and then get it ready, of course, for the time of famine. Now, of course, we should have been doing that all the time. The problem that we're facing these days in Canada or United States is that most people are living paycheck to paycheck. But here's something to think about. If you were to put away, let's just say $5 a day, and by the end of the year, you would have $1,800 or thereabouts, just by putting $5 a day away. And think about that. If you were to put that over a 5 year period, all of a sudden you'd have $10,000 that you would have in, of course, savings and ready for whatever it is. If you did that, for example, over a period of 10 years, you'd have $18,000. Do it over a period of 20 years, you have $36,000. And if you put it in some sort of an account, which with compound interest, all of a sudden you've got a whole bunch of money. And that's what registered retirement saving plans are all about. What we need to do, and this is a very important lesson for us to learn, what we're learning in Canada, and it's really becoming a reality for us. And you saying, are you telling me that I should be wise with my finances? Exactly what I'm telling you to do. Be wise with your finances. There's a very important lesson that we can learn from, of course, creation. And for example, I have some very large trees on my property. They're pine trees, and every single summer we have a whole bunch of squirrels on our property. And what are they doing? They are gathering their pine cones and everything ready for, of course, this winter season. We all know, and we should remember, that there's always going to be a winter season. There's going to be a time where there's going to be lots of things happening around. There's lots of abundance, but then, the good times end. You always have a recession. You always have a time where it is lean. And that is where really wise investments and wise decisions can make all the difference in the world. Now, I'm not here today to give you a lesson on money management, but what I am saying to you is make sure that you have the right attitude whenever uncertainty is facing. You know that the uncertain event will come to an end. That's a very important thing to remember. There's a scripture that says, this too shall come to pass. Just because you're in a season of abundance. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't enjoy your season of abundance, but remember, seasons come and seasons go. Now, right now, for example, where I live, we're just finishing up the season of winter. We supposedly could still have one or two March or April storms that could remind us that winter hasn't completely left us. But basically, we're heading into, of course, the spring season. And then you have not only the spring season, but the summer season. And then when the leaves begin to turn in the fall, then you know that winter is coming. We who live in the reality of four seasons, we know that when it is summertime, you need to, of course, stock up. My parents, for example, my mom and dad, they were raised during the Great Depression, okay? And so they knew what it was like to go without. So when I was growing up as a child, my mom and dad would always plant a big garden, okay? Because they understood that in those days, during the 50s and 60s, my mom and dad didn't have a lot of money, and they had four kids. So basically, they knew that what they grew in their garden was going to be substantial when it came to wintertime. And my mom was a expert canner, and she was an expert person at getting things ready for winter. So every spring, my dad would get up and he would go to a certain section of our land and he would dig it out and get it all ready. And he did it all by hand. When I used to plant a garden, I had a rototiller. My dad never did have a rototiller. It was all hand with him. So he'd be out there, turning the soil and getting it ready. And my parents had a very large garden, big garden. And my job, of course, in the summertime, as I got older, was, of course, I had to, not only cut the grass, but I also had to pick the weeds. And then when the time came, we would often help my mom and my dad also harvest in the garden. So it was a family affair, and we'd pick the beans, and my dad would dig out the potatoes and the beets and all the different things that my mom would put up. And basically, we had the peas, we had the beans, we had the carrots, we had the beets, and lettuce and different things that my mom would put. We had strawberry bushes and everything like that. And it was a major production. My dad and mom would put enough potatoes in to last the entire winter season. We would not run out of produce or out of vegetables. Also, as well, my dad, we had this old house, and my dad actually dug out a dugout underneath the house, and it was quite a production, and it took him a long time. Again, it was all by hand. And he actually we had a root cellar and everything. And that's how we made it through the winter, because the simple fact is my parents didn't have a lot of money. They would buy the basic necessities like bread and things like that. But our vegetables would last us right through the winter. And so basically, that's what my exhortation to a lot of people is. Listen, we all know that there is going to be seasons where there is going to be abundance. We're going to have lots and lots of abundance. But then every once in a while, we end up having a stock market crash. We end up losing our jobs. Things basically happen beyond our control. So what you can do, of course, is when you are in that season where everything is seeming to work, make sure that you put something aside. You can see that in nature. You see the ants getting ready for winter. You see the squirrels getting ready for winter. You see the bears getting ready for winter, because there's going to be a winter season. It's not going to be always sunshine and lollipops, at least for the average working person. You can prepare for winter. You need to be prepared for winter. And when winter happens, you can sit there and you know that you've done the right thing. It's like what they say when it comes to RRSPs. It's really kind of sad that how many people don't prepare for the future. And the reason why they don't prepare for the future, they believe that the good times are always going to roll. They always believe that it's not going to happen to them. And then there's a reality. It does happen to them. Did you know that 60%? I was listening to this yesterday. I was listening to a economist who was saying basically this. It was the governor of Kentucky. He said in Kentucky, he says 60% of people that live in Kentucky are living from paycheck to paycheck and are only $200 away from insolvency. In my province, get this, my province sits on, of course, the third largest deposit of oil and gas in the world. And we are an oil producing and gas producing province. So we have lots of gas and oil revenues coming into our province. So you would think that because we're sitting on all this wealth, that our province would be, humming along. And we've been humming along. That's right. It's been happening. But still, even in the province of Alberta, 50% of people are living paycheck to paycheck. That means that they are just barely making it. Now, of course, we have been in a season of high interest rates. We've been in a season of, accelerating prices, and things are still very, very expensive. Now, where I live in Alberta, basically, we have the lowest price of gas in the entire country. But our federal government has done something that is very not good. They put a carbon tax on us. And so about 50 cents of every single liter of gas goes to, of course, taxes. And so we are heavily taxed here in Canada, and it doesn't look like it's going to get any better. And in fact, most of the pain that we have been suffering has been because of poor government policies. And that's unfortunately what's happening in the States as well, because your particular government right now is making some very bad economic decisions. And governments do that. Governments, especially when you have businessmen running government, because businessmen think that they can run government like a business, and it doesn't work that way, because governments are dealing with social programs. They're dealing with all kinds of different aspects. In a country of Canada, for example, we have universal health care. That means that anybody in Canada that needs, of course, health care, it's completely free right across the board. Now, of course, that is very, very expensive. And because it's very expensive, we have higher taxes. United States, for example, is the only country in the world that doesn't have universal health care. That's why, for example, if you have something wrong happen to you in the United States, it can be a major problem. And that's why we have, we call them snowbirds, but that's why it costs snowbirds a lot of money for health insurance, because the fact if they do get sick in the States, it can be very expensive. We actually had a person in our church that got sick in the States, and the healthcare people actually put them on an airplane and flew them back to Canada so that they could get the right kind of health care here in Canada. They do that quite often because immediately, as soon as you go into the hospital in the States, you end up paying literally thousands of dollars, something like $5,000 every single day that you stay in a hospital. It's not good. So basically, these type of social programs do cost. Now, as I said, we are living in very tumultuous times. So the first thing you need to do is, of course, be aware, keep your head. Another thing that you can do, and this is very important, get a budget and stick to your budget right now. Don't buy any of those big ticket items right now. Make sure, and here's something to rely on. My dad, for example, he would buy a brand new car every 2 years. Well, you can't do that anymore, because the simple fact is a car these days can be anywhere from $50,000 to $60,000. And if you happen to buy a truck, you're looking at $100,000 just like that. My neighbor, listen to this. My neighbor that we live right beside, he sold two of his vehicles. They were, 218, 219. Got about he got about $80,000 for the two vehicles. And he bought another vehicle, a brand new Toyota, cost him $115,000. I'm going, $115,000? I drive Rex. But the simple fact is, be wise with your finances today. Plan for the future. And also remember, there's always going to be seasons of abundance and seasons where it's a little bit on the lean side. And when you are in that time of abundance, make sure that you put something away. And when the season of leanness comes, prioritize your spending. And make sure, and this is a very important point for me, make sure that you bring God into the equation. I want to tell you, I have had seasons of abundance and I've had seasons of leanness. And in those times of seasons of leanness, I have trusted the Lord, and I have seen him beautifully supplied in those seasons. When those seasons of abundance are upon me, I make sure that I have put away enough finances to be able to keep me going during those seasons of leanness. When I was in those seasons of leanness, I had made sure that I had enough savings to get me through. But the beautiful thing was I never had to dip into my savings, not once. God took care of me. The one thing that I want to remind you is this: God's economy is not dependent on man's economy. I've had several seasons where that has been my reality. And in those seasons, I was actually raising children. Yes, I had 4 children. And I saw God beautifully supply, sometimes, miraculously. So the simple fact is, when you are in that season, don't be afraid to ask God. Philippians chapter 4, verse number 19 says simply this: that our God will supply every need according to your riches and glory. In fact, Jesus tells us in Matthew chapter 6, he says, why are you worried about food, clothing, transportation, and shelter? He uses the illustration of the birds of the air and the flowers in the field. He says they neither sow nor reap, but yet, guess what? God takes care of them. And he even used the illustration of hair on your head. He says, listen, even the hairs on your head are, of course, wonderfully counted. So God's going to take care of you. I am a living testimony of God taking care of us. Did you know that I've actually had 2 houses given to me? 2 houses and 5 cars. 5 cars. And 2 of them were brand new. And whenever I have been in one of those seasons, I have seen God marvelously provide. Let me tell you a little story, just one, okay? We had a car accident about, I would say, back 2002. It was the last big car accident that I had. My wife and I were driving in on a Easter morning to go to service, and a big old Mack truck came flying into our lane. We went into the ditch. And listen to me. By the end of the day, our van was totaled. By the end of the day, someone had offered me the use of their automobile. One of the guys from my church said, Pastor, you can have my truck. He gave me a truck, an F-150 truck. He said, I have this extra truck and I'm not using it. You can have it I said, for my use? He says, no, you can have it. So I had a brand new truck. Listen to this. A couple days later, a person came to me and said, you don't have a vehicle. You're just using a vehicle. I said, that's right. He says, I want to give you a brand new car. I said, a brand new car? Yeah, a brand new car. And then I got the money from the insurance company. I ended up with 3 vehicles, and I only had one at the time. 3 vehicles. That was just one beautiful illustration of how God took care of us. We had a nice van, brand new car, and a truck. I tell you, it was absolutely. And folks, I didn't do anything to subscribe. I didn't talk to anybody about it. I just said, God, we need a vehicle. And all of a sudden, we had all these vehicles. And one of the guys who lended me the truck or my car, he said, man, oh man, Pastor, God really works really fast for you. I said, yeah, he did. On this situation, he did. So I've got testimony after testimony of God's goodness, of taking care of us. And folks, he can do the same for you because God is no respecter of person. There are things that we need to do to make sure that we're ready for the seasons of, abundance and the seasons of famine. But there are also things that we can trust the Lord to do when it comes to that. So and I know it's very tumultuous right now. I know it's very chaotic right now, but I want to tell you something. Put your trust in the Lord and don't lean to your own understanding. Just simply acknowledge him and let him direct your path. So let me just pray. Father, I know today that many of us are struggling. Many of us are living paycheck to paycheck. I understand that. But I just want to remind people today that we don't have to rely on the economy of man. We don't have to rely on the government. We can find our source in you. If we do our part, you will do your part. And in those seasons where it seems impossible, you can make a way where there is no way. We just need to stand upon your promises. And Lord, I just pray for those that are a little bit scared right now. We just need to put our trust in you and also in ourselves because we can control what happens around to us, what happens to us. We can control that. We don't have to fly off and get scared. We don't have to be fearful. We can put our trust in you. And I pray that we will do that. And that's my exhortation for folks today in these tumultuous times. So thank you for that right now. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, I hope that something that I've shared with you will keep your head. Remember, when everybody else is flying around in their head, losing their head, don't lose. Because you know what? You can actually take control of the situation by making constructive decisions. Okay? Thank you. Have yourself a great and godly day.